So I recently got involved in a React Native project out of necessity, and I'll talk a little bit about why it was necessary to switch to React Native, but to make a long story short, after using React Native, I am never going back to the old way of mobile development. So before I talk about the merits of React Native and why you might want to give it a try, I want to look back and tell you why it was necessary to switch to this, and then why it took me so long to even try something like this out. So first, for those of you who have absolutely no clue what React Native is a tool that lets you build completely native mobile applications by using React and JavaScript. And from this single React and JavaScript codebase, you're able to build Android, iOS, and a mobile web app from that. So first, why did it become necessary for me to use React Native in the first place? So I work with an organization and I authored an Android app about 4 years ago. The app is very nice, it works really well. About 2.5 to 3 years ago, I contracted a iOS developer to build basically a clone of that Android app. It came out okay, but not great. The biggest problem with it is that anytime we need something added with it, or if something goes wrong, and we're constantly having problems with it, it's very difficult to get in contact with this contractor, and it's very difficult to get the work done. It's also kind of expensive. Things that I know don't take that long, we're getting charged a good bit for, and I never really liked that. Now, we have a lot of features that need to be in the iOS app now, and this contractor is nowhere to be found. Now, me personally, I have basically no experience with iOS apps. I can do really basic things at best, but I just don't understand how it all puts together, and I just don't really want to spend the time to learn. So after a short discussion with my organization about the future of the iOS app, of which there was basically none, we pretty much landed on the fact that we have to do something. Now, I had already known about tools like React Native, Flutter, and other tools, but I was always hesitant to use them because I had a couple bad experiences a while ago with them. It was about 7 or 8 years ago when I first got involved in mobile application development, and back then there was a tool called Phonegap. And what Phonegap had proposed is that you build mobile applications with HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript and deploy them in a web view on the phone, and that would be your application. Now back then this was major technology and people were building all kinds of tooling around this idea, and for a while it was actually pretty popular, but it just wasn't sustainable. It suffered from a lot of problems, particularly performance. These applications, they were not native. They were just basically websites inside a phone. And when I built my first non-native mobile application that was designed to build to Android and iOS, it was done using Phonegap, and it turned out terrible. It did not work well, and from there I swore I would never use an HTML5 solution for mobile apps. As the years passed, I stuck strictly to native Android development, and that was really it. I just never got involved in iOS. I just didn't do it. About 3 years ago, I got involved in a different project that was using a tool called Xamarin to build an app using a single code base that would build to both Android, iOS, and Windows platform. Now what Xamarin had proposed is that you build apps using C# and custom Xamarin controls, and then they would build it to all 3 platforms. This was not like Phonegap though. This was actually native applications that were produced, so they were not in a web view, so they would have performed better than a Phonegap application. Now my role in this project was not in development, so all I could really do is just watch this get built. To call this application a disaster would be an understatement, and it was a disaster because it did not function well, it was very slow, but the biggest thing is that each of the 3 apps, Android, iOS, and Windows platform, they all looked completely different. And I watched as a lot of cat and mouse game was getting played. Like something would break on the Android side, they would go fix that, and fixing the Android side would break the iOS side. And then they would go fix the iOS side and it would break the Android side. And I remember thinking to myself, this is why I do native-only development. I don't deal with these tools that build multiple platforms. And it was at that point I swore off ever using this kind of tool ever again. So this brings us to present day, and after looking at React Native, my outlook on this whole thing has completely changed. So enter the land of React Native. Now I have about 40 to 50 hours on this particular project, and as I started digging in using React Native, I realized not only are these apps beautiful and perform well, but they look identical between the 2 platforms. And this alone completely erased all of the biases I had against these kind of tools. So for those of you who are already familiar about mobile development using these kind of tools, you might be asking yourself, well, why did I pick React Native? Why didn't I pick Flutter or NativeScript? And the simple answer is the talent at my organization, including myself, we already use React for our web front end, so it made sense to use React Native, because the React in React Native does indeed mean the same React that you'd use on a web front end. And indeed, that's exactly what it is. It's actually identical in function to React.js that you'd use on a typical front end. We can just scroll down a little bit here. For those who already know React, you probably recognize everything that's going on here. The only real difference is instead of HTML, you're using React Native elements. Instead of CSS, you're using React Native style sheets that use CSS property naming scheme, but it's not quite CSS. And to be clear, you are not building websites here. You're building React Native that is translating into native Android components and native iOS components. I'm honestly shocked at how well it's put together and how well everything works and how good everything looks. But the benefits don't end there. There's also a major benefit in the development loop. And what I mean by development loop is how you iterate when you're developing applications. So typically on Android, what you do is you'd write some code, you'd save it, you would then run it, it would show up on your device, and you test it. Android does have a thing called instant refresh, but you can't always use it depending on what you're changing. iOS, I don't know exactly what they have, I'm going to assume it's something similar to Android. But what React Native lets you do using a tool called Expose, you can put your Android phone here, you can put your iPhone next to that, you can connect them to the same React Native dev server, and then the minute you hit Control S on your editor, it immediately refreshes both of the phones. The ability to make and deploy changes rapidly and see changes on two phones in real time is just an absolute game changer. It saves so much time to do it that way. I have to imagine that there are going to be times where React Native and Flutter and Native Script are not going to be appropriate, but until I run into one of those cases, I have absolutely no intention of going back to the old way of doing this. Even if I just needed just an Android app or just an iOS app, I'm still going to do it with React Native. So to conclude, if you're someone like me who only knows one platform but not the other, or perhaps you're a developer who knows React on the web but doesn't know how to make mobile apps, then you should probably check out React Native or one of the other tools. And to be clear, I'm only really advocating for an alternative to traditional native development. I've never used tools like Flutter or NativeScript before, so I can't speak to the merits of those. I can only speak to the merits of React Native. It is entirely possible that one of those other two tools is better for React Native, but I think for my use case and for the talent of my organization and the fact that our web front end is already in React, React Native makes sense for us. Anyway, if you're a mobile developer or you've tried out React Native or Flutter or NativeScript or anything like that, let me know below in the comments what you think about all this. Thanks a lot for watching, I really appreciate it.